and thank you so much for joining us, Paul Fisher. And you are the Senior Associate at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. And we are at the Climate Bonds Initiative Conference this afternoon, and we've just got a couple of questions. And just to take a step back and set the scene, looking at green bonds in general and seeing how much of the market they represent, it's a small fraction. So why do they matter?
It's about trying to mainstream the ideas of green finance, having a brand and getting people to be aware of that brand. And you have to play into the concerns of the investors. People want to invest in something green, so you have to have some green products to invest in them. Now, actually, quite a lot of finance is already green, but it doesn't operate under a green label. So having labels like green bonds, at the moment it's only a tiny fraction, but actually, of course, there's a much wider section of finance which is already green. It just doesn't have to have that label. Having the label will help. It'll help give the branding, it'll help give them something for investors to focus on, and help the issuers to think about what they're issuing for as well. The use of the proceeds here is really the important thing, of course.
And that moves perfectly to my next question, which is around what is greenness?
Well, personally, I find this a slightly boring question because you know it when you see it, and you can easily spend days and hours, and people do, worrying about what is and isn't green. And so on the high-level experts group in Europe, what we recommended was a push for a taxonomy, which would define what green assets are. It's the first recommendation in the report. And that should help people who want to set rules, regulations, standards and labels. That's why you need a definition of green. In terms of the market, you just need to be transparent to investors. If you say to investors, this is to invest in a wind farm, this is to invest in a nuclear energy plant, and this is in a dam, it's up to the investors then to make their minds up about what they think is green. It's a bit like, you have vegans and vegetarians and halal, and people can choose what they want to eat. So transparency is the key from the investor's point of view. But if you want to set rules and regulations, then you need definitions, and that's why the green taxonomy is an important part of the European policy agenda now.
And taking that a step further, how do we measure this greenness?
Well, ideally, what you want to measure is the impact of something on the environment. And you can do that through carbon emissions, for example. It's one crude proxy. Again, you will never get perfect measures. And this is an area where the perfect can be the enemy of the very good. And so you just have to come up with some workable definitions. And what one person thinks is green may not be what another person thinks is green. But as long as you all know what you're talking about, then the investor themselves can decide what they want to invest in.
And just looking to that point around, what one person says is green and how one, organisation might measure it slightly different from another, are there any great examples of greenness in action that you'd like to share?
Oh, well, people are doing all sorts of things like replacing street lighting with more energy efficient products, creating wildlife parks, but it can also be just making a polluting plant much more efficient. So I don't think we should limit ourselves to thinking this is all about growing lots of trees and having grass parks. We still need to make things. We still need to produce energy. But you need to do that in as green a way as possible. And a lot of the investment that's needed will actually be taking things and making them greener rather than green. And that's just as important. If we want to reduce carbon emissions and stop global warming, we need to work on the bad stuff as much as we do produce some new good stuff.
And this is like, exactly what I'm about to say. But that point around global warming, and we've seen what the science is telling us, we need to be moving a lot faster and move more rapid. What are some of the key impediments that are, preventing a rapid growth in this area?
Well, there's actually quite a lot of good stuff happening now. And my understanding is that carbon emissions in the UK and the US have actually been falling over a longish period when GDP has been rising. So there is a lot of good going on. But there's just a sense of inertia. What's happened in the last couple of years is we've been going from the periphery, from this being treated as a marginal issue, to it being a mainstream issue. And as that awareness has grown, so the impediments get rolled back. Ultimately, I don't think there will be too many impediments, leaving Trump aside for a minute, because it will be the economics which drives it. It's already cheaper to produce renewable energy than it is to use fossil fuel energy. Once people wake up to that and they go for it, it will be the economics that will drive it. It will be much cheaper for people to have electric cars than petrol cars in a couple of years' time. That will drive consumer behaviour. And so the basic economics is eventually what will drive this. And we just need to try and push, try and spot any barriers and push, and we'll get there in the end.
And my final question is around the gap. So looking at the need for green finance versus what's available, how much of a gap is there?
You know, people do those calculations. It's not what interests me, because at the moment the biggest problem we have is not the supply of finance, it's the demand for finance. It's people willing to put up green projects and go and borrow. There's plenty of money out there at the moment, so there's no gap in that sense. What the gap is an estimate of what people should be investing and what would be the supply of finance. But the constraint at the moment is not the supply of finance, it's what people should be investing. And we need to do much more to bring on stream the green projects and the green investments and actually produce that gap. Because once we've got that, then we can do something with the financial sector to fill it. But at the moment what we've got is a dearth of projects for people to invest in. And that's up to governments. A lot of this is public sector money, or it'll be public and private sector partnerships. And that's where we need to do the work to get people coming to the market to be willing to borrow.
And your final message, because you mentioned the importance of public-private partnerships just there. If you're speaking to the private sector in particular, what would you want to tell them in terms of policy and strategies?
Ultimately, they should forget all the green campaigning. This is about hard-headed business decisions. Investing in green makes sense because that's where you'll make the money. Investing in brown doesn't make sense because you'll lose money. So forget all the politics, all the moralising. If you think about this just as a pure business issue, you will come up with the right answers for society. That's where we are at the moment. I think we'd get 80-90% of the way there if people could just focus on this as a genuine business risk.
Excellent. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Fisher.